Hello, everyone. Welcome to our new LinkedIn Live series, ADHD in the Workplace. I created this space recognizing that living with ADHD can present challenges in the world of work. And I hope that through our discussions here, we can generate ideas to support adults with ADHD at work. So I'm your host, Samantha Hugh, Director of ADHD Girls Limited, a company with a mission to empower girls and women with ADHD through effective advocacy, education, and specialist insights. So today I have a very dynamic guest on our LinkedIn Live show. She is someone who I first reached out to when I was navigating my ADHD diagnosis, a fellow model. Leanne Maskell is also a lawyer, author of 2 books which hit runway successes, and an ADHD coach. So she was diagnosed with ADHD age 25 and became extremely passionate about helping others in similar situations by publishing a practical guide, ADHD and A to Z book. So Leanne led large-scale change by talking to companies like Microsoft and Adidas about mental health and working with the government on ending exploitation in the creative industries. Leanne believes that this is rooted in empowering individuals to know their rights, access justice, and create change. So today I'll be talking to Leanne about her journey with ADHD and her latest book, ADHD and A to Z. So welcome, Leanne. How are you?
Good, thank you. How are you? That sounds very impressive. Like,
that is you. Okay,
how are
so,
you?
I'm really good. A bit of a very crazy morning, but I've got my ADHD jumper on with the
Oh, I love it.
light bulb.
Wow.
Yeah,
I've never seen it.
this is made by Born Anxious. It's a clothing company for people with, I guess, sensory processing issues. So like
Wow.
clothes that the labels are removed, and it's tactile friendly. So it's great.
As I'm talking to you, I'm being distracted now by this. It's like behind you, and somehow we just have them everywhere.
That's very handy, right? Because with ADHD-ers, we need to just touch something and move, and it's good for excess energy. So Leanne, I want to start by asking you, what is your experience living with undiagnosed ADHD, seeing that you were diagnosed at the age of 25? How did it impact your life and maybe like your work life as well?
I think it in a horrible way, it kind of feels like I didn't have a very good first 25 years of my. It was quite amazing. I had I was really lucky to have a lot of amazing experiences, but I was really, really kind of depressed and not okay. I was always struggling with anxiety, and I was not particularly happy teenager. And I kind of put that down to me, and I guess that is the problem. I was always trying to go out drinking and clubbing, and hated going to school so much that I would come up with really creative ways, like putting my head over the kettle in the morning to pretend I had a temperature so that I was ill to not go. And I just got so bored in classes and felt really stupid all the time and uncool and couldn't talk to people. But then in my exams, I got all A's, and my teachers were so shocked that I asked the whole class if I cheated in my exams. And I was really shocked too. Everyone was shocked. I was like, I didn't cheat, but it felt like I cheated because I knew that I didn't know the subjects, but I could just cram it into my brain for the week before and pass. And I think this is something that affects a lot of people with ADHD, and that you figure out ways of getting around. You check that box, which is actually a very productive way of living. You don't have to do the whole year of the work. But then I guess in the world where that's the path that's laid out, it's not very, I don't know, you definitely feel like a fraud, an imposter, really stupid, like you've somehow managed to cheat your way into getting good exam results. And it kind of traps you in a prison because you look like you are clever, let's say. So I studied law at university, but I didn't really understand anything that was going on. Hardly went to any lectures, completely. But then I could learn it all in a month, and I could understand it all. And I don't know if I could remember it afterwards, but I could definitely learn everything when I had to. So it was a really odd thing to have, because from the outside, I suppose I looked quite okay, and then on the inside, I was really, really struggling, and that became really bad after I finished university. So I think having the structure, even though it wasn't really like I wasn't going to all the lessons, but having that there, knowing that I was at university helped. And then once I graduated and lost that structure and like had to apply for jobs, that's where I think a lot of people with ADHD struggle, because you know how to get around this kind of strategy of school and education, but then being able to cram all of like something into your brain in the last minute doesn't really work for applying for a job, or even having like a job and having you like real life is having to put the work in every single day and being present and not like cramming all the last minute. So I really struggled with that after graduating. It was really it became very horrible. Yeah.
Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. And I know that so many of us with ADHD actually have that struggle, because it doesn't just appear later in life, you actually have that struggle from the very beginning in school, in university, and then when you enter the workplace. And you started working very young as well, didn't you?
Probably didn't help. So I started modeling when I was 13 as well, which I think is probably not the best job to do if you've got ADHD anyway, not the best job for a 13-year-old child to do. But yeah, that I think definitely had an impact as well. And when that became my full-time job after finishing university, it became terrible to manage, because you have no control over modeling. Like, you would find out what you're doing every night at 6:00 in the evening. And it was just a very bad way to live for me, because the next day I could be doing a really kind of high-paying job, and I could be flying to, I don't know, America to live there for 3 months, but you just have no knowledge of that in advance. So for someone with a brain that can't see in the future anyway, and is kind of addicted to impulsivity and novelty, it can become really unhealthy, like a roller coaster, a daily roller coaster.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I completely understand and resonate with that, seeing that I also do some modeling, but more on the commercial side, and the not knowing when the next job is coming, and then the constant self-promotion, which like you have to do on social media, also kind of impacts our mental health as well. So I was like amazed that you've put all your experiences, and also you turn your greatest struggles and your greatest pains into your greatest strength in the form of publishing a book, right? Actually, 2 books, one for models in the fashion industry, which hit like runway success. You were on the cover of the Times, and numerous big publication, and also now the ADHD A to Z book, which is doing even better than the Model Manifesto. And the reason for that, I suppose, is so many women want to know, and not just women, men also want to know what does ADHD look like. So like I just wondered, how do you structure your book, because it's done so well, and it's an A to Z, and you found a topic for each alphabet. And how did you came to put the content together? Because I know that requires some executive functioning skills as well.
Wait, I've got this one here. I've got the Model Manifesto and the ADHD book. My children. But literally, I think I just had the idea of doing an A to Z blog post about modeling when I was in Australia, where I had ended up on a long, very unhealthy, spontaneous decision after decision of getting to Australia, like spontaneously moving to the middle of this kind of beach town in the middle of nowhere. But it was very lucky. It works out. Living your life like that does work out. It makes you quite brave and adaptable and resilient. So I was like, I'll write a book to help models kind of not have to experience the exploitation I've experienced. And I had the idea of doing a blog post, which I just literally got when I was doing the yoga class one day. And I just tried to remember it, because I have a very bad short-term memory. And I kept repeating it, and then got back in the car and like wrote it all in the back of a book. And just, it sounds really spiritual and weird, but like I don't know. And I guess it's actually the same thing as the exams. It's like, it doesn't really feel, it's difficult to feel like very proud, I guess, of them. Or like, when you're saying like, oh, that's such a success. Like it's very nice, but it doesn't feel like I particularly can take credit. even though I should be able to take, I wrote the book, I did the book, it was very hard work, but like it just sort of came to me, and I just did it sort of automatically. And I do think that is what ADHD does, is like you can focus on things that you're interested in. You're like highly creative. I read something that said that they found that people with ADHD have more creative achievements, whatever they are, more creative than people that don't have ADHD. So yeah, I was really fortunate. And that's actually how I ended up getting diagnosed with ADHD, because I could write that whole book and come up with the ideas and the topics, and but then I couldn't finish it, and I couldn't like get the book published. And I knew that one, the model one, was just so important to get out there, because that information simply does not exist at all. And I suppose the reason it's been really successful is because it's the only book of its kind that exists in the world. And then the ADHD book, I literally wrote that one in the same way. Actually, my doctor told me, my new doctor, they said that the waiting list there was 7 years for an ADHD assessment. And I couldn't believe, again, how, and yesterday I found out my local doctor here in the suburb doesn't have any ADHD assessment services. So if you've got ADHD and you want to get assessed, they just can't refer, like you just can't do it. And a private assessment is over £1,000. That's what I had to do. And having experienced how exploitative really that process can be, and confusing and insanely expensive, it feels like a tax on you for having a different brain. Like I was having to pay £200 a month for medication, and that was making me quite ill as well. And my family were all like, you don't have ADHD. You're this guy is making it up. He's trying to get money from me. But yeah, you do feel like really confused in the process. And you're like, well, maybe they're right. Maybe, ADHD isn't real. Maybe I am. And that's already that's already your problem. It's like overthinking and not really being quite sure about things. So yeah, I was just really inspired to write that book. And I guess I knew the format of these A to Zs worked for me, because it gave me a structure to, like, I think probably if I tried to write a different book that didn't have, I did try to write a few different ones. They don't go anywhere because they don't have an ending. There's no structure in place. So yeah, so I was really fortunate with that one. And that one, I actually ended up publishing it. It sat on my computer for a year. And then when I started having ADHD coaching with the ADHD Advocate, where I'm now a coach, I published it, and I figured out all the processes, and I just stuck it on Amazon, because in that year, people kept messaging me. I was always quite open about it. People would message me and say, I think I've got ADHD. I would send them the manuscript. Like, here you go. This is my stock answer now. Here, take it. And they would all message back and be like, this is incredible. You really need to publish this and help people, because it's helped me get a diagnosis. It's resonated so much. I feel seen. I feel all these things. And I was like, okay, I should do it. But publishing it was a really kind of emotionally difficult process for me, and very shameful in a weird way. And then it's really nice now, a few months on, because Microsoft got in touch and they're like, come and talk to us. Okay, fine. And then doing the coaching, and now having become a coach and doing that full time. And now the book, I think we'll see. I think a big publisher is about to take on and put it out to an even wider audience than it's already got. So it's really nice how things work out.
It sounds really amazing, and I actually was one of the people you gave the book out for free in the very beginning. And I was really grateful for that. I was like, wow, it's in my emails, right? And I was really impressed, because I have this scientific background and I needed, to know the neuroscience behind things. And you covered that as well. You did a lot of research, I was really amazed to see that they were so fact checked and very well referenced, and you got good citations, So yeah.
My dad helped me.
So I was actually really interested in one of the chapters, and actually I'm interested in quite a few of the chapters which we will discuss later. But I think you wrote about, there's a chapter in the book where you talk about the strengths of ADHD-ers, and I think we talk about it quite a lot. And can you give me an overview about that?
Yeah, and that is actually what I loved about writing this book, and probably I'll have to add in the introduction, I had like a real publisher, but I loved being able to publish it myself and not writing an introduction, being like, I don't care. I don't need to have a conclusion, because this book is designed, I think, particularly for the ADHD mind. And the Model Manifesto, someone random came up to me and said, that helped me so much. I've got ADHD, and the format really helped me, being able to pick it up and not feel bad for not being able to finish a book, which I suppose has done. I was like, I need to write it. I need to write this one. So yeah, but I have got something at the very start where I say, like, please, I guess it's an introduction. It's like a kind of, this book is dedicated to everyone who's ever thought there's something wrong with them but can't figure out what it is. Anyway, I guess that is a mini introduction, but it says, please start at W is for weaknesses. And that one, because I went through, I think ADHD is very interesting because a lot of people think like, oh, it's a problem or it's an illness or well, it's a condition. And actually, I think then, especially with coaching, you talk to people about the challenges. And, you know, as I said before, it can be challenges. It can be quite exhausting. But actually, I think having ADHD is really an incredible asset. And like, every single challenge, let's say, like, I don't know, making impulsive decisions can actually be a strength and is really a strength. It's just how you want to view it. So that's how I wrote that chapter, taking all these like challenges and weaknesses and being like, actually, that makes you, you know, for example, a really brave person, and the difficulties with like self-esteem and rejection sensitive dysphoria, which I told someone about recently, and they looked at me like I was completely insane. It was like, right, you have a sensitivity to rejection. But, you know, those things do make you incredibly compassionate and very good at laughing at yourself, because you do understand what it's like to feel like crippling pain of someone not liking you. And you do understand what it's like for people when they're feeling left out. And so I think people with ADHD tend to be really, really kind and compassionate, caring, enthusiastic. Our short memories are really good for like forgetting failures and trying again. Why not?
Yeah. Agreed.
When they have babies and you forget the pain of the baby and you're like, oh, do it again. But yeah, and like I think for me, like the impulsivity and stuff, like I never would have published these books if I had a normal brain, I don't think, because one, they take a lot of effort and a lot of time, but you're interested in something with ADHD, you're able to focus on it to an extreme degree, where other people, in comparison, unfortunately, to when you're not interested in something, you can't focus on it, and it takes you a lot more energy than it would for someone that doesn't have it. But you know, the plus side of that is literally these books and like ability to just do amazing things, and I think hopefully that really help people. And also, I think everyone that I meet with ADHD, they've all got a really strong sense of social justice, like you as well. I think. Everyone, they all seem to have this like passion to help people, and I think it's really nice and really, really inspiring to be around and seeing, like, literally, like you've built this in like a few months of being diagnosed, and it's just incredible. So yeah, it's a really, really exciting, like, fun life, and I do think it's about how you see it and how you see yourself fundamentally. That is the end of my answer. Very long answer.
Yeah. Thanks, Leanne. That's so comprehensive, and there's so many times I wanted to say something, but then I told myself I'm not going to interrupt. Okay, I'm going to let Leanne finish.
You have that ability.
But yeah, so yeah, I mean, back to what you say about ADHD as having this sense of social justice, because we are very emotionally driven and we need to know the reason for why we do things. And a lot of the time we want to make a difference, maybe because, you know, our own childhood is so rooted in what the hell is happening with me, you know, like I want people to understand more. And so as you grow up, you want to actually help, you know, people get the understanding, you know, and like you actually said, I built this within a few months, but actually the true story is I built it within 2 or 3 months and then had a burnout for the 3 months following after that. So it took me some time to actually get out of it, So yeah, I mean, the strength of an ADHDer is innovative, creative, ability to, do something that maybe some people might take a year to do. You can do it in a month. But, the power of hyper focus and the flip side of that, I think we've spoken about that before, is burnout. When you're so like focused on attaining this goal, and when you hit it, like you actually get this crash, of the dopamine, which is the crash is slower, than the high it takes you to get there. So it takes time for people to come out of burnout. Right. And so like as ADHDers, we need to pace ourselves, don't we? And also have like accountability and, structure around us, that can help. And that is why the workplace support is so important, because you have someone with ADHD who has above average human capital, and they can generate ideas, and just change the course of an organization and the growth of it. But what if they can't finish the last 10% of their work, when they're so close to deadline, when the challenge is over, right? Isn't it like worth just supporting them for the last 10%, and that is normally when people burn out and actually don't want to do it anymore and quit impulsively, right? And so if we can just provide a tiny bit of accommodation or support around that area and understanding, the organization stands to gain so much from an ADHD.
Yeah, I think that because ADHD is so highly situational, and because if you're interested in something, you can achieve incredible things. I think it's really hard and really common that I hear from people coaching that they can't get the support they need for the easy things. Because I think, and it makes sense, because I think if you saw someone that was hitting all their targets and they're amazing, and then you'd think, and they're like, actually, I can't fill in this Excel sheet. I know it sounds a bit crazy, but I literally can't do this sheet, and it's taking me over a week. It's then hard for someone else looking in to be like, well, what help do you need there? Especially because it can be so embarrassing, because you're like, well, I should be able to do this because I can do all the other things. I think it can be really hard for the organizations to understand what help they need, and then for the person to ask for that help. But I think like having that almost awareness of the differences in how a person is, and it's kind of like the example in the school, but like being like, okay, just because you're really good at these things, which we all deem successful, doesn't mean that you're able to do the things that we think are easy. So how can we help you do those things which are easy, which we think are easy, but I think that can often be the source of a lot of confusion and struggle for people in the workplace, because it traps you in a prison of your own like perfectionism and all these like little things pile up, all the Excel sheets. You're like, I'm just not going to do that, and then they pile up, and then that becomes a really big problem, and then I think people burn out. So it's a really important thing to be aware of and ask for help with, because work is like, how we define ourselves these days as people, and where we spend all of our time and what we do. So
yeah, it's actually incredibly difficult for ADHDers, because not only that you need to find out what your strengths are and what kind of work will light you up, because being motivated by an interest-based nervous system, you do need to do something you're passionate about, but also that you're working you're working in the system that might not actually understand how your ADHD brain is, and what people don't understand, they might inadvertently stigmatize, and that's why it's really sad, because it's so simple, but with a bit of awareness, you actually get to understand the people you work with, your colleagues, the people you manage, and maybe even your manager, because a lot of managers might even have ADHD, and they might run around in circles and chase their own hoops, not knowing how to help themselves. And maybe it's just as simple as getting someone to help manage the project, getting a project manager, getting a bit of understanding and support at work, means that it can turn things around for an ADHD, and stop the corporate burnout that so many people have, ADHD or not. So I want to talk about your book, actually. So there are some chapters about your book that is quite interesting, and quite related to the workplace. And I wonder how, what you think about them. So like in the chapter about jobs, I think you mentioned the Disability Act 2010. Like when I read that, I thought 2010, how much do they know about ADHD then, right? Because the awareness with ADHD increased, over time, and like, so especially in women. So like, how effective it is, do you think? If someone would quote Disability Act 2010, help me, could you do something about it? Would the employer actually do something about it?
I think it is the Equality Act 20. I need to check it, but I'm pretty sure it's the Equality Act. And I think that act basically says that someone shouldn't be discriminated against on the basis of a protected characteristic, which includes disability. And disability includes, I think it is a condition, which a mental health condition or a physical condition, which impacts a person's ability to do their job, like severely. It materially impacts their ability to do their job like their colleagues on an ongoing basis. And this is where things become very interesting. So I worked just now in mental health and disability law for a couple of years, which was really amazing to do, and to learn about. Literally, I worked on like reasonable adjustments guidance for lawyers. And so, yeah, there are a few different things. ADHD, it was only recognized as being able to be diagnosed in adults in 2008. So that means that probably there are hundreds of thousands of people out there with ADHD, but just because they were, I don't know, over the age of 18, when they went to get help, they couldn't be diagnosed with ADHD because we had this old image of ADHD as just being like young boys disrupting the class, and that's the only people it could be diagnosed in. But thankfully, we've moved on a bit now. Thankfully, people like me, I would not be very good if I had not been diagnosed. Probably wouldn't be here. So yeah, and that's why it's so important, because so many people are like committing suicide and self-harm, and especially with young girls now, it's gone up by like 98% or something since 2012, since Instagram and all social media has come out. And researchers have actually found symptoms of ADHD and something they've called variable attention stimulus trait, like a new condition where you've got the symptoms of ADHD from technology. And so I think most people that I know probably have some form of this, which is why you say the word ADHD and everyone thinks, oh, well, that's, everyone, I did that. That's why I wanted to write the book. When I was diagnosed, I thought I had like all of these problems. And the psychiatrist was like, no, it's like, you just have ADHD. And I was like, that's not a real problem. I was like, that's fine. I'll take it. That's a socially acceptable problem to have. Fine. Because I had in my head, the university students taking like Ritalin, but then being diagnosed, that's why I wrote the book, because I was like, oh, okay, it is a real problem. Or not, it's a real thing, like it is a true thing, because I think it's really hard to conceptualize this in your head, because you're like, yeah, everyone loses their keys and everyone is addicted to their phone. And I guess it is a spectrum, but how they diagnose you as well is you have to have 2 or more areas of your life that are severely impacted for a long time. So the same thing. So I think that your average person that loses their keys wouldn't be able to be diagnosed with ADHD, but someone who couldn't get a job because, like me, I would just see the job applications and shut down. My brain would like, I can't do it. Nope. And then instead, I would ironically get really, really depressed and like anxious and be like, I'm never going to get a job. But I couldn't even apply for it. It couldn't even sit down long enough to create a CV to do a job application, which is what is so incredible, because you wouldn't think that from someone that has managed to get through university. And I've seen doctors say to people like, we can't diagnose you with ADHD because you're studying law, so obviously you're fine, which is amazing to come from doctors in like 2021, 22, 20, whatever year we're in. So yeah, and then I think apply that to the workplace and this Equality Act. I think there's been a couple of cases in the employment tribunal so far about ADHD. One of them I know has won, but it's an area that is very new. So I think even like 10 years ago, if you had a disability, like a physical disability, it would be difficult maybe for your employer to make the accommodations, because there was just less like, I think like having the internet and things like that. So one really important thing that I wanted to write in this book is that the government can fund coaching for people. And that's why I became a coach. I was like, that's amazing. Like, I want to help other people how I've been helped. because that coaching is a really important part of like putting in structure and accountability and learning these like day-to-day strategies that you wouldn't otherwise learn because your brain is just off doing something else. And it's life-changing. It's amazing to see people on a weekly basis, their lives like literally change by just having someone help them come in with this like kind of independent perspective. And so I think in the workplace, it's really important, first of all, with disclosing your ADHD. You don't have to. And I think we're at the age where D&I is cool. People want to be able to publish their diversity and inclusion statistics. So, but you know, your average person is not going to want to disclose that they've got that ADHD. Why would they? Because I think I do understand, like for most people, they would think, well, that's only possibly going to hurt me. And especially if you've figured out ways of coping so far, and maybe you're struggling, but you think you can manage it, like before you burn out, you'd think, well, and especially if you don't really relate that to ADHD. And I think there's a lot of stigma about it in the workplace. I think people are not really, I speak to someone that have said they would prefer not to disclose ADHD, but they would prefer to disclose something that they thought their employer would take more seriously, because they were like, they'll just think I'm making it up if I talk about ADHD, which is really fascinating. Because I kind of had the opposite. I was like, it's not really a disability. I don't know, is it? Maybe. I don't know. Oh. And then I was like, actually, maybe it is. Okay. Because I think there is a lack of basic general understanding about what the word disability means. And I think people with ADHD and anything else are not disabled. Like, I'm not disabled here today, but in the wrong environment, that can disable me. That can mean that I can't do my job like other people can do their job, because I'm expected to work in like the same conditions that they are. My brain just will not do it or can't do it. And so I do think that it provides good protection for people, because I think that actually it does a really good job, because employers, they have to I don't. I've not been asked this question before, that's why I'm thinking on this. But I think that employers have to so if they know that you've got a disability, or if they become aware of it, say you tell them, or they think that maybe you've got a disability that's impacting your ability to do your job, they then have a duty to make reasonable adjustments for you to be able to do your job like everyone else. This is where I think it's got a problem, because what does reasonable mean? And also, what does the person, like if you're like me, for example, you don't really know what help you need until you're in a situation and until you've tried it. And so that's like an ongoing conversation. Whereas I think someone that is, someone that maybe had been diagnosed their whole life, they might know what they need that would help them. But until you're in a situation, it's really, really difficult to say that. And I think these conversations are so hard in the first place, because I think employers are really aware of the potential to be taken to an employment tribunal for like discrimination, and they don't want to have that happen. So they take this very legalistic view of being like, what can we do? We don't want to accidentally discriminate you. How do we help? But that is often by referring a person with a disability to something called occupational health, which is usually like an independent psychiatrist who would generally say, yes, this person is disabled, or maybe they're disabled in some situations, or no, they're not. They might make recommendations about what could help, like in terms of reasonable adjustments. But then I think there's a real lack of understanding of what comes after that. So like the work that I did with the Law Society on their new reasonable adjustments guidance is a really, really good place to start, I think, because what happens after that conversation happens? What happens after that assessment, especially people change. Like, I think a lot of women get diagnosed with ADHD after they've had children, or when they're going through the menopause. And if you've had a conversation about it maybe 10 years ago, and some psychiatrist said that, yes, you're disabled, how do you bring that up again? And so I would really recommend having these like reasonable adjustment, like disability or ability passports, where people can have an ongoing conversation and see what's been put in place and be part of that. But I do think it's a really big gap for employers. I think it's hard for everyone, because the individual just wants help to do their job, but they don't want to make a fuss, they don't want to cause a scene, they don't want to have any problems. And the employers, they want to help the individual too, but they don't know how. And if there's no one to help kind of facilitate these conversations, it becomes a little bit more difficult, because it's not like you just need a ramp to get into the workplace because you can't walk. But I suppose it's more about thinking like, can you reach the cups in the kitchen in the same sort of way? Like, what other things could there be that might become a problem? And then how do you ask for that help? So I do think that the law does a good job of protecting people, because I do think employers are very, very aware of their potential for being liable for discriminating against them if they don't give them that help. Most hopefully are. I think there's a lot of support with the government's Access to Work program of actually paying. Sorry, I'm now on my rant of soapbox, but the average cost for a reasonable adjustment in the workplace is only £75 per person. But anyway, the government's Access to Work scheme pays for a lot of that. They fund a lot of these reasonable adjustments, like coaching or training for the workplace, or colleagues and managers on what a condition might be. It's not just ADHD, but any disability. So I think there's a lot of help out there, but I think there is definitely still some way to go, because I think we're in the world where social media, it's a very overly sensitive word. That's why I was really worried about publishing the book, because I was like, what if I accidentally offend someone? And it's just how we all have our own like biases that we've literally grown up with, and until you have that conversation or make mistakes or learn, it's really hard to then move on, but or to get it right, obviously. But yeah, so I think a lot of people are really scared of getting it wrong, and that means that they don't have these conversations in the first place, and that means that people are indirectly discriminated against, or directly, because it just feels easier not to have them.
Yeah. I mean, like you explained it really well, actually. And also, like, I find with many situations, when an individual with ADHD run into problems at work, and they actually disclose their ADHD, a lot of the times the system they work in doesn't actually know how to deal with it, because it might be their first time, dealing with it. And so they don't know things, that, other people who are specialists, and actually, have worked in this field know about it. So that's why it's so important to work with, even occupational psychologists, people who know more about the neuro-inclusive, design, work design. So like, I was actually quite interested to hear that you said that Access to Work will also fund training at work for ADHD. Would that be sort of organization-wide training, or sort of more like one?
I know that they can fund training for like group, like colleagues and people that work in the workplace about ADHD, because I think ADHD, I read another statistic, something like 63% of people with ADHD have their relationships at work impacted by their ADHD, which I think is a really interesting thing, for something where you've got a really big problem, that especially if it's impacting it, like one of the most embarrassing things that's ever happened to me is like, your tolerance can build up and you don't realize. And I just snapped at someone that was kind of talking very loudly next to me. I just told him to shut up. And I'm so mortified by that. I'm sorry. I bought him a plant and sent him a card, things, but I would never do that normally. But I think, and that is really hard to know, that might be caused by someone's ADHD. But I didn't realize that I was really, really struggling for a long time, because I was like getting really distracted. And like before that, I'd even realized that I'd snapped at this poor person. I'd done it. And I think these are the things that like it's helpful to at least make other people aware of, because I think it's the individual's responsibility to know. But at that point, I had no idea about the fact that ADHD can have an impact on you, where you are sensitive to like noises and distractions. And until you know about that yourself, and then until other people around you can know, to the extent that they, I guess, understand or can work best with you, because that will make everyone the most productive. But I think it can be, I think that's another really difficult thing of like these relationships at work, because say, for example, if I was given an office because I because I just snapped at everyone that walked past me, or probably work from home, that other people might think, well, why is she allowed to have that? And I think that's the really difficult calculations that employers have got to make. And I do think like having open conversations about training about ADHD, training about like mental health, like how people work, and how to have think really importantly, these difficult conversations, because I do think that we're in a world where it's really hypersensitive, and people can immediately hear the word like disability and jump in their brain. They're like, oh my God, you know, are they going to complain? I think a lot of problems with ADHD and performance come up because often, like I mentioned about, maybe you don't know about ADHD until you've got a problem, like a performance plan, and you know, your manager's saying you're not doing well, we're going to put you on the performance plan, and then maybe at that point the person would say, I've actually got ADHD. What do they do then? Especially if they hadn't known before. So I think it's really a tricky situation. But access to work can pay for the training, and pay it for the reasonable adjustments like headphones, and I think, personally, I think that having like conversations and honest conversations outside the kind of scary, anxious worry of being sued is the most like productive thing that anyone could do. Because especially, I think the value of ADHD to the workplace is absolutely amazing, and I think people don't want to lose valuable people in their workforce, especially because it's something that's not in their control and that could have been helped. So yes, I hope that's a help.
Yeah, I mean, you really answered everything really well. I'm actually curious. So when someone with ADHD goes to Access to Work, they will be able to get the funding to ask their employers to you know, have this training about ADHD awareness around, like, you know, where they work. That's amazing, isn't it? Because I don't think employers know about this.
No,
you know,
exactly. That's why I wrote the book. That's why we're doing the phones. But I don't think they know about, like, even the fact they can pay for coaching, or even the fact that they can pay for the reasonable adjustments. Like, I think they have no idea because it's not really spoken about. And ironically, it's a very bureaucratic process, not a very ADHD friendly process, but it is there. And I don't know exactly how that would come about, because I know that they do an assessment with you as part of this process to figure out what you need, but I don't know. I think employers can pay back.
Exactly. I think one of the issues that make ADHDers, you know, sort of anxious about going into work is how they might be perceived, you know, if, you know, they have some weaknesses that they are trying to mask, but it comes out, you know, and like you say, if you work in an office environment, you know, we often have sensory processing issues. So for myself, I can't stand an open plan office, you know, and I have to have my noise cancelling headphones and pretend that other people don't exist, you know, but like that's my way of coping. But like breakout rooms, you know, having like a separate quieter section, standing desks, you know, that, you know, ADHDers can just go to when they can't, you know, really deal with the noise and the distraction in the office. And also remote working has been a godsend in some ways, you know, for us, because the energy that we spend having people like, I know some ADHDers are very hyper and sociable, but then for me, I actually prefer to have my own space, like a lot of the time, to actually focus if my work requires focus, you know. So like not having to like deal with too many people throughout the day is actually quite energy saving as well, because especially if you're autistic, you know, that can really, you know, help to have this support in place. Yeah. And shall we talk about RSD or burnout? You choose one. R for RSD or B for burnout?
The rejection sensitive dysphoria, that was like, again, something life-changing because I heard of it, and I guess I had the reaction of like, oh yeah, we're sensitive to rejection, like, yeah, whatever. And then I heard the podcast and they were talking about it, and it was like a doctor or someone, and they were saying that, I think it was William Dodson.
William Dodson.
And they were saying, like, when a person with ADHD feels that they're being rejected, they have this intense bout of pain, and it's so painful that they can, like, their mood can go from like happy to suicidal in a matter of seconds, and you know, and that is the one really unique thing that they've associated with ADHD and nothing else, because I think that's something that needs to be talked about more, because I thought I was completely insane, because I would experience this and I would feel like really, really suicidal. And then I would be fine the next day. I'd be like, I'm not actually. And then you actually ironically, you beat yourself up because you think like, I'm not really suicidal, but sometimes you feel like a drama queen, or like you actually are just like making it up somehow, or you're having a tantrum. But in that moment, it feels like so real. And I think that is where a lot of people's suicidal, where people commit suicide a lot, because often when you talk to, I don't personally talk to that many people that have tried to kill themselves, but I hear that they regret it like immediately afterwards. It's an impulsive decision. And I do think that they're like emotional attacks, like emotional flooding and emotional overwhelm. And I've become a lot better now that I understand it. Now that I understand this is like a valid thing that people with ADHD experience and take medication, which I don't think particularly helps. But it does help me have the process. So instead of like a problem happening, I'm not like, oh my God, I just have to turn this off. I'm like, okay, what else could be going on here? And it slows it down. So I still feel like quite emotional sometimes. But yeah, I don't feel suicidal anymore. And that is the one, like the biggest difference. I've like not felt suicidal since taking the medication. And yeah, I think it's something that people don't talk about. And I think for me in particular, I didn't want to tell anyone this, because you hear that like, doctors and counselors would have to tell someone or something. I had the image in my head, if I tell anyone, then I will literally be put in prison, or prison, mental health, like hospital. Yeah. I will be sectioned. But actually I'm fine. Like, I have. Yeah, and I think a lot of people that I talk to think that they've got bipolar. I know that bipolar and borderline personality disorder is something that is often misdiagnosed as ADHD, but bipolar will happen for a much longer period, over certain weeks or months. This is like hours. It's very exhausting to happen. And it's a really weird thing to experience, and it's really difficult to tell someone and them not to think that you're absolutely bonkers, because I kind of imagined the scenario in my head, and I've gone off on this crazy mood swing. And
I think a lot of it is rooted in our childhood as well, and late diagnosis.
Like, I shouldn't say the word crazy.
I was just gonna say a lot of it, I think, is over. I was going to say a lot of it is rooted in our childhood as well, in the sense that if, most of us are diagnosed later in life, and by then, we already have our self-esteem impacted, and like to understand, how we respond to things is, first you have to understand how our brain works. And the reason I say that is because, with our brain, we're so emotionally charged, and things that we can perceive in our prefrontal cortex just go straight to our amygdala, and we have this emotional flooding that we cannot explain why it is, and our default mode network, which is the mind-wandering bit of the brain, is also switched on at the same time as the part of the brain that does the work. So, we can actually experience a lot of self-doubt and, just worry, at the same time as trying to do the work. So, that's why I think also RSD is, a problem for people with ADHD, mainly also because of, the lack of understanding as well in how our brain works. And, I think also knowing this, will help us be more aware of what is going on, and maybe reduce the length of time as well for RSD, because that why this is, and that the criticism might not be valid. It might not be a real thing, and then you can help yourself better.
Yeah, you can step out of the box. You can be like, oh, maybe instead of beating myself up for feeling this way, maybe it's my ADHD. And that is, you still feel that way, but you're able to not be in it.
Yeah, that's right. But actually, I do find that being on medication helped to boost the mood a bit, and maybe reduce the self-doubt, and anxiety around social situations. It might actually also help RSD. And I heard that actually there is a medication for RSD, to help you so reduce the effect, and it's called guanfacine. But I'm not a medical expert, so definitely check it out if you're going to pursue that idea. And the next question really is around burnout. the chapter in your book where you talk about burnout is something, I and maybe you and, a lot of people can relate with. Can you maybe talk about how you got through the process of writing that chapter? And
well, when I wrote the Model Manifesto, I literally would. Oh, sorry, I went crossover. When I was writing the Model Manifesto, I would wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning and I would work until midnight. And I wouldn't have breaks, really. I wouldn't eat, I wouldn't sleep, I wouldn't do much. I would wake up thinking about the book. And I think this is something that can happen quite often to people with ADHD because we get so focused on something. And I think because you know that it can go away. And I was going to say one thing with the RSD, but coaching can really help with that. Coaching can really help with all these things, but coaching is like a pause where if you can just hold on and like put these things there in that pause. And there's a woman called Byron Katie, and she's got these like questions. I've created a worksheet for my clients on RSD, but it's like questioning and like having a look at the facts and just slowing down that process. I think the same with the burnout. It's like we don't pause because we're like, oh, I'm going to fail at this. For example, the book, like this book, I wrote it in like a month originally. And it's because I did it nonstop every day because I was like, okay, I know that I've tried to write books since and I haven't felt this like focus again. And I have to do it now because it might go. And it did go. We finished it eventually with coaching. But yeah, because you think it might go, so you just have to do all of it right now and you don't have time to even think about it. And I think we can often like burn ourselves out doing things that maybe are not very helpful either. But we think we're working and we think we're doing something, and ADHD brains are seeking stimulation all the time because we hate boredom. So we can often be really prone to like kind of doing things and being a human doing, I like to call it. And we think that our 150% effort is normal. And we think like, okay, that's just how, like I literally just saw that as my normal way of working. And I think I would sometimes send work to people that would be like 20 pages long. And they're like, why have you done this? All I wanted was a summary, but writing the summary is so difficult. That's much harder than like writing 20 pages. And so I think being able to get that in your brain and figure out that actually someone else's 100% is your 75%, and slowing that like break down, because we've got like Ferrari brains with bicycle brakes. And like trying to put those brakes on can really help with the burnout, because I do think that's how a lot of people get diagnosed with ADHD, because they have burned out to the point that they're just physically and emotionally exhausted. They can't get out of bed. They're just burnt out. They don't care about themselves and they're not able to kind of function. And I think it's something that's happening more and more, especially with the pandemic, because we have no boundaries anymore. Like I would just wake up, turn my laptop on in bed and at work, and then go back to bed at night, which is a really unhealthy way to live. So
yeah, well, I can attest. I can actually resonate with that very much. I mean, not just like working in a workplace, but as an entrepreneur, when you start your own business or you want to build your own venture, you just tend to like keep working and then not have not know how to stop. And I remember there was this one week, I volunteered to run an event where I speak to like ADHD specialists and women with ADHD, and I had to post 5 videos in that week. And I was just saying, yeah, I can do it. I can do it. And I was working round the clock, around my son sleeping next to me, and then in the dark. And then I remember on the 4th, video, after I uploaded it, I had to travel somewhere for work to a shoot about 3 hours away. And I nearly crashed that day. I was just thinking, what is happening, right? When you're just going a million miles an hour and you don't know how to stop, and all your senses are in overdrive. And that's when gosh, you need to take a break, and that's when I thought, okay, I need to just rest now. But then that burnout lasted like more than a month or 2, and it took me a while to get out of it. But yeah, like you say, having coaching, really help to, bring us back, because a lot of the time we can't see things for ourselves. We can't mirror, what we're doing to ourselves. We need someone to be our mirror, right?
Yeah, my boyfriend is very helpful. came home yesterday and he was like, what did you have for lunch? I was like, I haven't actually stopped working since he left the house in the morning. And he was like, what are you doing? But yeah, having other people there and the support system is so important, especially when you're a mom and you have children. I don't know how you do it. I have no idea how people have children or families.
I don't know. I don't know either. I think a lot of the time I function on anxiety, and I think now being medicated for it actually helps me know that, right, I need to do one thing at a time, but it's still like years of habit built into that. So I have to unlearn that habit, which
Exactly,
isn't something you can just fix, that easily. So I actually want to wrap up this interview by asking you what your hopes are for your book and what are your plans for the future.
Oh God. I don't know. Well, there, as per usual, now I've just left my job, so I'm doing coaching, which is amazing, and a million other things, which probably, I think if we can slightly erase that, so what do I have? I have this book, which I think is going to end up being sort of republished by a bigger publisher, by a publisher, which is really, really, really amazing. So that will probably be quite a long time, but it's really incredible because that book, originally when I published it, I misspelled ADHD and it said ADHD, and I put a picture on the internet, and then I was like, I am the biggest idiot. How can I unpublish this book? What a waste of time. Oh my God. It was like RSD spiral. And I was so embarrassed of it. And the messages that I've received over the last, however many months, 9 months, has just been amazing. And people keep buying it and reading it and sending me messages about how it's changed their life and how they feel seen and how they've cried, and how they've got diagnosed with ADHD and they've got help. And that is so incredible to hear, because that's all I wanted. I thought when I was diagnosed, Googled ADHD and you find loads and loads of really confusing information on the internet. It's all really medical. It's all very I didn't have the patience to understand what the prefrontal cortex was, and it all seems bad or good, but it's really hard to relate to. So I really, really hope that by that book being out there and accessing the people that it needs to access and being pushed to that audience, it helps, hopefully. And so then I'm working at the moment on basically ADHD in the workplace. But helping employers and taking what I've done before with the disability law and that knowledge and the experiences of ADHD at work, and I guess the things I was talking about, and to try and fill that gap and make it a better place and do training and workplace support, really, which I think doesn't quite exist with the sort of helping have those conversations, because I guess it's like an external person. But I'm doing that with my company where I'm coaching, ADHD Advocate, and coaching is very busy. A lot of people want ADHD coaching, so that is something I'm doing as well, which is literally the most amazing thing ever. And then also with the modeling, we've got very exciting things going on with modeling itself, and then modeling, it's really, really amazing actually, because the Model Manifesto, when I wrote this book, I was going around and meeting agency owners, and there's something called the British Fashion Model Agents Association, and I was like, you should do these things, and they're like, who the hell are you? And when I published it, although it was really successful and it was really incredible, it did feel a bit like, oh, what's actually going to happen? But now, 2 years on, working with the government on a roundtable that they've set up and a working group to fix the problems in the book, I'm like, the manifesto, and the BFMA are creating all these different initiatives to help models, and so a lot of work going on in that area as well, because we're doing it across the whole of the, which is very exciting. So doing quite a lot of things, trying to not burn out, but it's really, really amazing. I'm really happy and excited at the moment. So
yeah, that sounds so promising and also so inspiring, to hear your journey from someone who's gone from undiagnosed to actually getting the diagnosis and the help, and then now helping others, and really, on your way to fulfill your potential, if not already, so like the future is limitless, and like, and I just want to say to anyone, who's watching, who might be struggling with ADHD traits, at the moment, like, get the help you need, and coaching and mentoring will really help, and, that things can turn around, and you will have the life and, that you deserve, and, be able to fulfill your potential. So thank you, Leanne, for this insightful interview. I think like everyone who's watching this would agree that, this is quite an inspiring and insightful session.
Sorry, out.
Yeah, the internet is a bit unstable.
The internet is fading.
Yeah, I hope that people can hear us, at the recording. But yeah, thank you so much for everyone for tuning in from wherever you are in the world. And we'll be sharing a recording of this episode on ADHD Go's YouTube channel and also on LinkedIn. So as Leanne mentioned, she's working around ADHD in the workplace, providing support, training, and mentoring. So I've also teamed up with a group of ADHD professionals, and including Leanne, and we are interested in partnering with corporates or academia who want to make their systems more ADHD friendly. So please get in touch. And also, we're always looking for sponsors for our LinkedIn Live series, ADHD in the Workplace. So if you're in the business of empowering an individual with ADHD in life, education, and work, please do get in touch. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Leanne.
Out.